Today we're going to talk about hips and how the hips work in our swing. Most high-level swings, there's some sort of a load or loading phase where the rear hip either coils or there's a post, or a negative movement where we're loading some stored energy in that rear hip. When we get the front foot down, the front hip will have to open, and when it opens, it's clearing space for the rear hip to rotate around to get through the zone, just like your bat would. And then the front leg, as it's extending and locking out, so to speak, it's driving that front hip back, which is all delivering the power that we get from the ground back into our body, which eventually comes out through our hands through the barrel as we rotate through. And what we're going to show here is a couple different styles. Again, the styles are really up to you and what you're comfortable with, what age you are. Some athletes are able to do different things. Some can post better, some can't. Some are better with a wider stance and just kind of a slight counterclockwise rotation, or a slight negative movement in the hips and then exploding on the ball with the hips going first. But the main body here is that your hips have to store energy in the rear hip and then unleash it through the front of the zone. And the way to produce the most amount of power is when we straighten that front leg out and drive the front hip back while the back hip's working through, that we're generating the most amount of force and the fastest rotation we can in the hips, and that just trickles out through our trunk, and then the end result is the whip, so to speak. The crack of the whip is the sweet spot of the bat. So what we're looking to do here is show you some different ways that different athletes do that. Here is a traditional kind of post where we're going to get up, and his load right now is all in that back hip, back butt cheek. As we stride out, and see, as we talk about, the hips kind of stay neutral here. And then as he starts to get that front foot down, hips slowly open. And then right at that extension point here, that front hip starts working back as we lock the leg out, which helps clear the space for the rear hip. And then as we get connected, we're flying through the zone. This next one is more of what I would call a closed stance, where the hips are rotated so we're very close. Everything's facing the home plate and the catcher. And as we start to rotate, same principles though, the front leg gets out, starts to extend, which helps drive the front hip back, and then the back hip has an area and a space to clear and drive through, creating as much force as she can with this style, driving that back hip through. The back foot becomes unweighted because of the force that the hip is turning. It's pulling the back leg off the ground. And then last we have Lauren Chamberlain, who had a wider stance, and you just see a slight counter rotation where the rear hip kind of settles in, the front hip starts to close a little bit. This is part of her timing mechanism. As the front foot is already down, she's already rotated that hip counterclockwise, how she would usually turn when she swings, and then she's going to unload the back hip. But it's the same principle. As this front leg starts to extend, it's pushing the front hip back, and the rear hip is making space to come through. I think on this pitch she got something down in the side, so she didn't get a full extension on the knee. But that's how we're transferring power from the ground back through our hips, which eventually, as that works its way through our body, and it's released through the barrel head. Again, all three styles are fine. It really depends on what you are comfortable with, and every athlete has their own style, their own ability, and it may change over time. We want to make sure we focus the most on make sure we actually have a load in the rear hip. It's something that's really overlooked, especially in younger athletes, where they tend to almost seesaw back and forth, or they'll lean back into the back foot and then they'll fall forward, which isn't really the best mechanic. But we want to have some sort of a motion where we're going to settle into that hip, something where we're going to have a hinge at the hip, start to kind of sit or squat on that back hip, and then stride and explode. We'll have some more of these videos coming out in the near future, and thanks for watching.